Mildred Matheny. On Saturday, April 27, 1985, Mildred Matheny vanished from sight. Her naked and motionless body was discovered on a dirt road between Jupiter's intersection of 125th Avenue North and Old Indian Town Road. Upon seeing it, someone called the police. On April 7, 1985, 78-year-old Mildred Matheny, an Alzheimer's sufferer, left her home in Lake Worth Beach, Florida, and into the vehicle of an unknown person. Regrettably, her carefree excursion ended with her death. Later that day, 30 miles from her home, she was found on an uneven dirt road, bruised and nude. She died 11 days after being injured. For nearly 40 years, Mildred's murderer and attacker went unidentified, until in 2023, a breakthrough led to a conviction. Situated in East Central Palm Beach County, Florida, Lake Worth Beach is a quaint city. Its name comes from the Lake Worth Lagoon. With a population of over 42,000, the town is located approximately 64 miles north of lively Miami. East of Palm Springs, north of Lantana, southeast of Lake Clark Shores, and south of West Palm Beach is where you'll find this coastal sanctuary. Situated in the heart of the huge Miami metropolitan area, Lake Worth Beach is a unique center of innovation and culture. Here, experimental music, dance, theater, and vibrant visual arts all thrive. The community is built on the familiarity of neighbors knowing one another by name. Like a place where trust is demonstrated by open doors, the streets are safe. However, even in the middle of this idyllic setting, a tragedy occurred in 1985, leaving a mark on the otherwise peaceful community. Mildred Matheny was born in Wilmar, Arkansas on February 28, 1997. Her early years were influenced by tragedy, even though she was the second of Jess and Margaret Warren's 6 cherished children. When Mildred was 8 years old, her father, who was 37 years old, died of a heart attack. Margaret, a widow, was devastated and had to raise their 6 small children by herself as a result. Mildred began a career that would influence many aspects of her life as she got closer to adulthood. Over the course of her more than 40 years of dedicated labor in the field of psychiatric nursing, her kindness and compassion touched countless lives. In her early years, she wed Guy Harmon Matheny, and the two of them had a wonderful son named Gary. However, life has also been full with heartaches. After Mildred's husband died in 1958, she was left a 51-year-old widow. To make a living, Mildred worked as a psychiatric nurse in a Little Rock mental health facility for almost 40 years, with steadfast dedication. Later, after her husband died, Mildred moved from her hometown of Arkansas to Palm Beach County, Florida, where she found comfort in the warm embrace of the city. After Mildred overcame adversity in life, her 75-year-old sister Gladys Nolan offered her a place to live and company. Their home was located in the 1300 block of Crestwood Boulevard in Lake Worth Beach. Boulevard Crestwood, 1300 block. Mildred's journey had been marked by a life of service. As her brother's mental state worsened, she not only looked after him, but also faced her own health issues as she approached 70. Because of her condition, she began a new chapter in her life at her sister's house. She was drawn to Florida's breathtaking coasts, and her son and grandkids gave her the confidence to take the risky decision to relocate. However, there were some difficulties with the adjustment. The shift put her in unfamiliar territory, and dementia affected her judgment. She was terrified to leave the house without a trustworthy friend. She was eager and full of anticipation for a visit from her beloved grandchildren when she and Gladys moved into their new Florida home. At about 4:30 p.m. on April 27, 1985, Mildred Matheny, a dementia patient, vanished from her peaceful community at her Florida home. Witnesses reported seeing her at around 3:30 p.m., completely oblivious of the approaching disaster, as she left her home while still wearing a shirt over pajamas. After an agonizing hour, the alarm went off and she was placed under formal missing persons report. About 20 miles from her last known location, on a secluded dirt road, a passerby discovered her unconscious, nude, and injured 7 hours after she went missing. The moment the bystander reported his discovery to the authorities, an investigation was launched. The dirt road was now tainted with blood from Mildred's trauma, her garments left behind and her bloody dentures. Her clothes were scattered around, and her blood-stained dentures were found on the road. They transported her to Juniper Medical Center due to a significant head injury, and a brain surgeon evaluated her there. The woman's face and head were heavily bleeding, giving the impression that she had been hit fairly severely. Although no one witnessed her abduction, her neighbors stated that at approximately 3:30 p.m., they spotted her strolling down the street while still wearing her pajamas. 11 days later, due to the heavy blow to her head, among other mild ailments, Mildred passed away. People were heartbroken by the fact that she had been attacked so violently. Hospital personnel conducted the assault test because the way she had been injured was so horrific. For the detectives to piece together, everything came together. They took samples from the location of the incident that included DNA from both the assailants and Mildred Metheny. But since there were no hits at the time owing to antiquated technology, the lawsuit was dropped. Nobody knew who had killed and harmed Mildred for nearly 40 years. The only evidence the police had was some DNA left behind by the attacker, but it was too ancient for scientists to identify the source. For years, the authorities maintained that the Cold Case Homicide Squad had been instrumental in resolving this case. Cold case investigations are the primary emphasis of this detective unit. The assault evidence was linked to the offender through the application of advanced and innovative DNA analysis techniques. After a scientist reviewed the evidence from the Palm Beach County Police Station where this incident occurred, Mildred's foreign DNA was identified in 2021. Using this DNA, they created a profile which they subsequently entered into the Florida State Combined DNA Index. Richard Curtis Lang was quickly linked to DNA found in the attack kit. Records show that he was 25 years old when he injured Mildred. To be certain, though, investigators required a direct sample of his DNA. Richard Curtis Lang's saliva had to be obtained in order to verify that it matched the foreign DNA discovered on the victim. To accomplish this, they have a warrant or other legal authorization. On April 22, 2021, detectives went to Richard Lang's home in Boynton Beach, Florida, and collected a sample of his DNA. Records show that in 2006-212, Richard Lang, who is today 62 years old, got into major difficulties which forced him to give his DNA. His DNA was added to the database in this manner. After all these years, the killer of Mildred Metheny has finally been identified thanks to clever detective work and cutting-edge technology. Richard Lang's past legal troubles are documented in both state and county records. In both 1983 and 1993, he was convicted guilty of aggravated assault. However, he was given a probationary sentence rather than a prison sentence. He didn't stop there, though. In the year 2012, on June 6th, his weapons were found. Despite the seriousness of these actions, he did not serve a lengthy sentence in prison. He was given short sentences, therefore he did not spend a lot of time inside bars. In April 2021, Richard Curtis Lang was taken into custody and charged with Mildred Metheny's murder. The study began in the first part of 2023. Additionally, Richard Lang was accused of killing and assaulting Mildred Metheny. A tiny bit of genetic material centered a landmark trial in a West Palm Beach courtroom. Mildred's assault kit sperm was directly related to Richard Lang. During the trial, the scientist who found the match gave testimony in court. The probability that the DNA they discovered came from Lang was 27 quadrillion times higher than that of it originating from someone else, even though they were unable to confirm that it did. Attorney Scott Skier for Richard Lang contended that the DNA might have possibly originated from Lang's close male cousins. However, after identifying Richard Lang as a suspect, detectives did not perform any DNA matching on any of them. Joe Walensky and Krishay Mixon, assistant state attorneys, refuted this claim by reminding the jury that no other family members were in Florida in 1985. They described it as hypothetical. Richard Lang moved to Florida in his 20s to work as a plumber after leaving Massachusetts. At the age of 25, he viciously assaulted Mildred Metheny. So it was obvious that Richard Lang was the real culprit. Judge Delia Weiss of the Circuit Court sentenced Richard Curtis Lang to life in prison for the most serious allegation of first-degree murder. Lang, 63, was declared guilty. After Lang was found guilty, his family informed the judge that they would file an appeal. His attorney read the letter out loud in court. They thought the conviction contradicted everything they knew about Richard Lang. They asserted that the man appearing in court was not the same person they knew, and that the accusations made against him were not consistent with his true nature. The letter offered a different perspective on the guy who was convicted in 1985 of seriously hurting Mildred Metheny, a 78-year-old woman who was loved as a son, father, brother, and uncle. Richard Lang led a decent life that was based on his Catholic faith. The great-niece of Mildred Metheny reminded the judge in a letter of the intense suffering and anguish Mildred had gone through before her passing. One of the lawyers, Mixon, read aloud a letter that had been written by Metheny's great-niece. It contradicted Richard Lang's pleading for forgiveness. Mixon begged the justices to keep Mildred Metheny's suffering and dread in mind. Judge Wise agreed that Mildred died in a horrible and violent way. Mixon requested a second life term for battery in addition to the earlier life sentence for killing. Scott Skier asked for 9 years, but Judge Wise granted 15. Richard Curtis Lang was sentenced to life in prison following the death of Mildred Metheny. He is currently serving the remainder of his life in prison. Closing a case may seem easy when you are familiar with all of the details, characters, and occurrences. The emotional cost and intricacy of such a voyage, however, cannot be overstated. Gary Metheny had been impatiently waiting for a call like the one he finally received for over 36 years. Finally, he learned that someone had been held responsible for his ailing mother's horrible demise. He said, "I'd given up hope," to convey how he felt. Years of unpredictable experiences had passed for him. He was overjoyed to learn about the arrest at the age of 88. What do you think about this case? Please use the comment area to share your thoughts with us. Moving on to the next case. Paula Illyra. Paula Illyra, then 13 years old, came home from school in East Harlem, New York on January 24, 1991, around 4:45 p.m. She went into her apartment building's elevator and headed to the 30th floor, where her family resided, after receiving her mother's buzzer. But during this brief trip, Paula vanished out of nowhere. A man walking his dog found Paula's lifeless body half a mile from her home 3 hours later, at 7:30 p.m. Unsettling doubts regarding Paula's disappearance and death, as well as what had happened to her, plagued the neighborhood after this tragic tragedy. Paula and her family were an essential part of the El Barrio, or East Harlem neighborhood, which is located in the center of Manhattan, New York City. This neighborhood, rich in culture, is well known for its wide range of customs, artwork, and strong feeling of community. With its colorful street murals, restaurants, and festivals, East Harlem gladly embraces its Hispanic and Latino history. The prestigious Museum of the City of New York, which highlights the rich history of the city, is also located in this neighborhood. The background of our story is placed against the roughly 1 in 22 chance of becoming a victim of crime in East Harlem, according to statistics. In the latter part of the 1970s, Viola Hilera was born in Colombia to parents Cesar and Olga Hilera. The two elder siblings she had were Julio and Alexandra. Paula relocated to East Harlem, New York City in June 1990 with her mother and brothers in pursuit of a better life. They shared an apartment with Paula's uncle Guillermo Ospina at 420 East 111th Street, where they lived on the 30th floor. Her father, Cesar, continued to work as a taxi driver in Colombia in the meanwhile, gathering money to eventually go to New York to be with his family. As soon as they got to New York, Paula started junior high school. Paula excelled academically and devoted her free time to studying English and mathematics, according to her sister Alexandra. She had very few friends, most of them were her classmates, and she wanted to be a lawyer so that she could help people. Uncle Guillermo thought she was far too smart and adult for her years, with maturity and intelligence beyond her years. He also noted that Paola's love of the English language brought her a lot of happiness in New York. Her uncle Guillermo claimed that she was a young child with many aspirations for the future. Paola's family appeared to be moving along nicely until a tragic event drastically changed their path. Paula, only 13 years old, left her school on a cold January 24, 1991 afternoon and returned to her apartment building's comfortable confines. She reached the building's door at about 4:45 p.m. and used the intercom to get in touch with her apartment. Olga, her mother, answered and let her in by pushing the button to open the lobby door. Olga had no idea that her final conversation with her cherished daughter would take place during this routine exchange. Paula opened the door, went into the lobby, and got into the elevator. Sadly, though, she never made it to their flat on the 31st floor. Paula didn't get home for 10 minutes, and her brother and uncle started to worry. They decided to look for her since they felt that something was off. They raced downstairs to the lobby and found it entirely empty. They searched the neighborhood furiously for Paula, but she seemed to have disappeared. A man walking his dog 3 hours later at around 7:30 p.m. discovered a startling find. He discovered a body on the sidewalk close to the East River. Used lighters, vials, and other drug-related items were scattered all over the place. Sadly, Paula's thin corpse was still motionless and she had already passed away. The place where her body was found was about 0.5 miles south of the apartment complex where she lived. Detectives were met with an incredibly depressing scenario when they arrived at the scene. There were no leads available to identify the criminal. Paula's body was found to contain only a piece of chalk and a new kid's block watch. Paula's family and the area as a whole were greatly affected by her murder. Olga, her mother, was inconsolable and found it difficult to accept her daughter's passing. The tragedy stunned Paula's school students and faculty. Following the incident, educators met with children to provide support and grief-stricken assistance to Paula's family members. For their own protection, they advised students not to stroll around the area by themselves. Reporters were not allowed inside the school, and neither the principal nor district representatives would talk to them. There were a lot of unsolved questions for the detectives. In an attempt to locate witnesses who may have seen Paula in the area where her body was found, they searched the 30-story building. Sadly, nobody had reported seeing her there. Furthermore, the investigators lacked a description of the perpetrator. Paula's body was discovered stuffed with crack vials, although it was unclear if she was slain there or somewhere else. Important information was discovered by the detectives during their investigation. They discovered that Paula frequently stayed after school on Wednesdays and Thursdays to attend a journalistic program. She was working on a Valentine's Day gift story about her father the day she was murdered. Additionally, the investigators learned that Paula and a friend left the school following the workshop at 4 p.m. and headed north on First Avenue. At 106th Street, they split off, Paula going in the direction of her family's apartment complex. Aram Warford, another youngster, was found to have used the same elevator as Paula by the detectives after they obtained information throughout their inquiry. But when they spoke with him, he said that Paula had continued her climb while he had left on the 19th floor. As a result, the detectives shifted their attention from him to another possible suspect. The autopsy revealed a horrifying picture of Paula's level of pain. She suffered 3 stab wounds close to her heart, as well as being molested and strangled. On her thighs, the medical examiner also noticed strange, elongated markings. It was clear that Paula had fought back against her assailant, who had twisted her legs so that the bruises resembled fingers. The male hair that was removed from her body and saved as evidence was also collected by the examiner. Saint on February 2, 1991, where Paula was buried. Queens's East Elmhurst is home to Michael Cemetery. 4 months following Paula's terrible death, her family decided to move to Flushing, New York, where they were helped by Victim Services, a private nonprofit that assists victims and their families of violent crimes. The oldest victim in Flushing sought comfort from Victim Services through therapy at the Families of Homicide Victims program. The family held on to the dream that Paula would receive justice while they dealt with life's challenges and recovered. But as time went on, the case progressively grew colder, and the search for solutions grew more difficult. In any place at any time, the murder of a 13-year-old girl ought to have attracted a lot of media attention. Unfortunately, this horrible crime in East Harlem remained mostly unreported during the violent outbreak that rocked New York in 1991. Over 2,000 murders were reported in the city between 1990 and 1992, and an average of 6 bodies were found every day throughout New York City's 5 boroughs. Regretfully, most of these occurrences happened in disadvantaged neighborhoods where minorities predominate, like East Harlem, the South Bronx, and East New York, Brooklyn. Sadly, the media paid little attention to more than a handful of these situations. Rather, the media preferred to concentrate on more upscale crimes with white, rich victims in beautiful environments. Paula's case was deemed a low-priority homicide because of the absence of political pressure and media coverage. As a result, her murder remained unsolved and was virtually forgotten throughout the majority of the 1990s. Midway through the 1990s, New York City's crime rate started to decline, but there remained a concerning tendency in the East Harlem housing developments. Regardless of the teens' race, a string of seemingly unconnected events surfaced, all of which involved the assault and killing of young, attractive youths. A 15-year-old girl was attacked with a knife in 1994. This episode exposed a pattern of behavior that the offender used again throughout the course of the following 4 years. He would come up behind the adolescent, take her to a private area, blindfold her with a rag from her own clothes, have her take off her clothes, and then beat her. Remarkably, the 15-year-old survivor was able to describe her attacker. He was a well-groomed young man with a robust build and an exaggerated feeling of his own value. It's shocking to say that he even told the victim how fortunate she was to be attacked by someone as attractive as him. Firefighters were alerted to a rooftop fire at the George Washington Residences on East 104th Street a few years later, on September 10, 1997. After looking into it, they discovered a woman who had been badly beaten, hit with a blunt weapon, and charred beyond recognition. Jogelis Castro, a 19-year-old who had moved to New York from the Dominican Republic with her family, was eventually confirmed as the victim. Johalis, a young mother of a daughter, had been attending a small college in the Bronx to further her computer science education. In the same neighborhood, a 13-year-old girl became the third victim 7 months later, in April 1998. Thankfully, the little victim managed to flee without harm. 2 months subsequently, on June 2, 1998, 17-year-old Rashida Washington tragically passed away. She had been robbed, attacked, and strangled when she was found in a 15th floor staircase of an East 100 and 12th Street apartment project. What had happened was not immediately apparent when Rashida's body was discovered. Her shirtless, lifeless body was leaning against the wall in a sitting position. Rashida was a fashion student who worked at a clothes boutique. She was small, just weighing 100 pounds, much like the victims before her. Regretfully, she was killed 3 days after turning 18. 2 other young teenagers were assaulted in the same region during the fall of that same year. On September 25, 1998, a 15-year-old was attacked, and on November 16th, a 14-year-old. Fortunately, these 2 teenagers made it out alive, probably because the attacker was blindfolded before they had a chance to get a close look. The authorities did not openly admit the likelihood that a serial killer in East Harlem was targeting teenage females, even if there were still similar occurrences. But in the end, the police chose to act right away because of the worries expressed by the victims' parents. A comparatively modest database of DNA samples was available in the early 1990s since widespread testing of convicted felons had not yet started. But in the fall of 1998, there was a major development in the East Harlem cases. Experts in forensics from the New York police examined body fluid evidence from the murder of Rash Washington, and 2 other cases that were comparable to it in the area. These tests unequivocally connected the 3 incidents to the same offender. At last, investigators possessed tangible proof verifying the presence of a prolific offender preying on adolescents in Harlem. In response, the police hierarchy established a detective-led task group with the express purpose of apprehending the suspect. They responded by distributing the wanted poster, which included a drawing of the serial killer based on the victims' descriptions. After the leaflet was distributed in East Harlem, Addister recommended that the detectives concentrate their search on a 25-year-old man named Ace, who lived on the 19th floor of the same building where Paula had previously resided. The police soon learned that Ace's real name was Aaron Key, which brought them memories of Aaron from Paula's murder case. Arone Warford, a teenage boy who had been observed getting into the elevator with Paula and claiming to have left on the 19th level, was brought to the detectives' attention. Arone, an unusual first name, also surfaced during the 1997 murder inquiry of Jojalise Castro. Phone records showed that in the days preceding her death, Jojalise had made multiple calls to a man by the name of Aaron Key. When questioned, Aaron said that Jojalise was a friend of his girlfriend Jacqueline's, and on the day of her murder, they were organizing a shopping excursion. Jacqueline, who spoke with the police, affirmed Aaron's account. Later on, it was found that Aaron Key and Aaron Warford were the same individual, with Key being his mother's last name and Warford being his father's. Given that Arone was the last person seen with Paula before her death and that he had extensive phone connection with Jojalise before her murder, this revelation connected him to 2 of the 3 victims in the suspected serial killer case. These ties sparked questions, so investigators looked into Arone's past more thoroughly. He was described as a reasonably spoken and intellectual man. He was born on September 18, 1973, and grew up mostly in East Harlem. Paulo lived in the same building as his relatives in 1991 when he vanished. Arone has a reputation for being charming and having computer skills. He claimed to be involved in the production of rap music, but there wasn't much proof to back up this claim. He was physically attractive, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall with a dapper appearance. His criminal history included just 1 theft charge in 1990 and little to no jail or prison time. On the other hand, neighbors thought differently about Arone. He was noted as having a troublesome side, constantly carrying a portable video camera to record inappropriate footage, and frequently looking through the women's skirt folds in the building. Even though the police didn't have any solid evidence against Arone at this point, they still felt that a thorough investigation was necessary. Their attention turned to the attacker from September 1998, who had left a gray sweater and a black cap behind. The detectives made the decision to thoroughly inspect these articles of clothes in search of leads. Their efforts were rewarded when they found a laundry tag on one of the clothes that directed them to a dry cleaner close to Aron's house. The fact that Aron's mother Cynthia was identified as a client at this dry cleaner added even more significance to this discovery. Law enforcement was more and more certain that a DNA test would prove Aron's guilt for the crimes, since all the evidence seemed to lead to him as the main suspect. But there was a big impediment in their path. Since DNA testing was not required for alleged offenders in New York until 2000, Aron did not have a record. Getting a DNA sample in the 90s wasn't as easy as asking for a swab and hauling in a suspect. DNA tests were regarded as intrusive procedures, and obtaining a sample required a judge's approval based on a reasonable suspicion. Even with strong circumstantial evidence linking Aaron to the incident, specifics like the laundry tag, phone conversations, and elevator ride weren't enough to persuade a judge to request a DNA sample. Consequently, the authorities were forced to devise a backup plan. At first, they tried to follow Aaron in the hopes that he would spit or throw away some chewing gum and accidentally leave behind a saliva sample. Nevertheless, this tactic didn't work. On February 8, 1999, when Aaron was taken into custody for taking a computer hard disk, detectives made their big break. At the time, there were no regulations in New York requiring DNA testing of those who had been arrested, so the police used some deceit to get a sample. Under the pretext of conducting a standard osteoporosis test, a female investigator who was dressed as a doctor approached Aron and requested a sample of his saliva. When Aaron saw a paragraph that mentioned DNA analysis, he cautiously declined to cooperate even though he was given documentation to sign. He used his Jehovah's Witness faith as justification for not being able to receive medical care. He tore apart his paper cup, flushed the fragments down the toilet, and then switched cups with his cellmate to further perplex investigators. But the cops were ready. They'd already taken action to gather the relevant evidence. Aram was placed in a common holding cell with 5 other males shortly after his detention. The personnel gave them mugs of water to drink while they were there. These cups were found by the investigators in a waste paper basket, and they were then sent for DNA analysis. The results, which were obtained in a matter of days, verified that the DNA of the East Harlem criminal and a sample taken from the rim of one of the cups discovered in the police holding cell matched. As Aron was merely charged with a misdemeanor for computer theft, he was already free on bond by the time the results of the DNA test were available on February 12, 1999. In the meantime, the $11,000 reward given by the New York Police Department was for any information that would result in his apprehension. Soon after, the police learned that Aaron had gone to Brownsville, Brooklyn, and met up with Angelique Stallings, his 16-year-old lover. Her folks thought they were heading out on a Valentine's Day date. But rather than following through on their intentions, Aaron and Angelique left Newark, New Jersey, and boarded a bus bound for Florida. The possibility that Angelique was in danger or may suffer the same fate as the earlier victims worried the detectives. Aron called his other girlfriend in New York twice after getting to South Florida. By now, headlines had been created about this supposed serial killer on the run. When the second girlfriend realized what was going on, she quickly called the police and told them that Aron was staying at the Miami Sun Hotel, which is situated on Northeast 1st Avenue in downtown Miami, about 2 blocks from the ocean. 2 investigators from New York hurried to the hotel after receiving this tip and started monitoring it. They summoned the Miami-Dade SWAT squad for help when they saw Aron and Angelique wandering about inside. On February 19, 1999, the SWAT squad attacked the building and found Aaron and Angelique cowering under the bed on the 6th level of the hotel. Aaron was taken into custody after being captured. Aaron opted to keep quiet and withhold any information when detectives attempted to question him about the East Harlem crimes. But the police came up with a plan. Later, they led Angelique to enter the interrogation room as they observed and listened behind a two-way mirror. Aroni and Angelique assumed they were saying goodbye in private. Angelique pressed Aroni to explain why he had committed the atrocities during their talk. Aaron gave a perplexing response. He claimed to have been ill and said that he had bugged out. Arone was eventually extradited to New York to face trial on 22 felony charges related to 4 assaults and the deaths of Paula Hilera, Yojalis Castro, and Rashida Washington after a protracted 4-month court battle. 6 of the 7 instances had a Roan connection according to DNA evidence. Prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Plansky presented an impressive case against Aaron during the fall 2000 trial, utilizing a plethora of witnesses and DNA evidence. 2 of Aaron's victims were among the 130 prosecution witnesses that they called. Aaron insisted on testifying as the first defense witness. Aaron showed a range of emotions over his 2 days of evidence, from laughing like a schoolgirl to crying like a baby. He expressed his annoyance at being charged as well. He covered a wide range of topics throughout his soliloquy, which was mostly unhindered by the judge, prosecutors, or his own attorneys. These included pop culture, narcotics, rap music, jail food, and his thoughts on the criminal justice system. In front of a courtroom full of his victims' relatives, Aaron conjured up a bizarre story to explain why he was being accused of brutal serial abuse of young ladies. He stated that a dishonest medical examiner involved in the illegal trafficking of human organs had teamed up with the police to frame him as part of a cover-up. He even claimed that there had been genetic shuffling, or tampering with his DNA. His elaborate story did not, however, sway the jurors. The courtroom erupted in cheers on December 16, 2000, the day the guilty decision was announced. Aroni swore profanely at the distraught relatives as he was led past them. 1 month later, in January 2001, Aram's victims' families were given the chance to speak with him face-to-face during the sentencing. As she thought about her daughter's suffering at the moment of her death, Paula's mother, Olga, spoke to him, hoping that he would understand the agony of restless nights, appetite loss, immobility, and lack of calm. Having taken her daughter to the United States in search of the American ideal, Olga described her ongoing suffering. During his turn to speak at the sentencing hearing, Aaron sobbed and expressed regret. Yojalis Castro's male cousin exploded with rage in response, trying to jump over the barrier and throw himself at Aaron. After this, the punishment was given by Justice Jones Soldanek. She gave Aaron 3 life sentences for the 3 murders, with no chance of release. He was also given a 400-year sentence on 4 charges of abuse. Orome was a prisoner at Dannemora, New York's Clinton Correctional Facility. By the time Orome received his sentence, laws requiring DNA testing of anyone accused in connection with violent crimes had been passed in New York and many other states. Since then, the majority of felony arrests, both violent and non-violent, have been included in this testing. In addition, several jurisdictions have started testing suspects' DNA for misdemeanors. Olga's pain of losing Paula is still very much present. She is well aware that the pain caused by the unexpected and senseless death of a loved one does not go away, especially in cases where there are still a lot of unresolved questions.
Moving on to the next case.
Vicki Lynn Belk. In Prince George County, Maryland, Suitland is an incorporated census-designated place in the United States. Suitland's blend of urban and suburban areas makes it an ideal place to raise a family. The well-known parks in Suitland are a popular weekend destination for the town's liberal residents. Suitland is a lovely town, but in comparison, no matter how big the community, its crime rate is far greater than the national average. Tragically, a young mother was abducted and brutally murdered in Suitland in 1979, leaving behind her loving family. Vicki Lynn Belk was born on March 20, 1951, into the Belk family, which consisted of Lonnie and Maydell. The oldest of the 6 Belk siblings, Vicki was a loving big sister to her younger brother, Lonnie Jr., also known as Ricky, and to April, Brenda, Judy, and Kay. Like all of her siblings, Vicki grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. Vicki and her sister Judy became the first African-American pupils to attend the Minnie Howard Elementary School in Alexandria, Virginia, after their parents, Lonnie and May, filed a successful case against the Board of Education school desegregation judgment. Vicki later earned her T degree. 1969 at C. Williams High School. Vicki was a child during the Civil Rights era. The Bell family was a family that was always willing to defend the rights of their community and themselves. They also stood by their moral principles. Even after being the victims of violence and losing a few fights, the Belk family continued to be role models for everyone in their neighborhood and for one another. Vicki was passionate about advocating for her area and speaking out, much like her family. Vicki was a role model for her siblings because of her generosity and thoughtfulness. Vicki graduated from college earlier than anyone in her family, at a time when chances for her and her community were scarce. Vicki earned a Bachelor of Arts in Education from St. Augustine College in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1974. Her skill in her chosen industry and her diligence paid off. She was employed in the Office of Operations and Finance of the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C., as a management analyst. In 1979, Vicki, a 28-year-old mother, was balancing work in Washington with raising her small son, Lyman Belk. Vicki's great-grandfather, Wesley Casey, co-founded Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria. Where she worked as a church secretary and Sunday school teacher, she continued to be involved in her community. Vicki's family was close to one another and communicated frequently. Early in August 1979, Vicki's whole family gathered at Oakland Baptist Church to celebrate Judy's marriage. Vicki's ex-co-worker and current lover, James Hill, accompanied her to the wedding. Vicki was Judy's maid of honor and helped with a lot of the event organizing. Vicki went back to her normal life with her lover, James Hill, who worked for the agriculture department, a few days after Judy's wedding. On August 27, 1979, Vicki and James got ready for the day as usual. They rode in James's 1972 Buick from their Prince George's County condominium to the Stadium Armory Station, where they parked and caught the rail to their offices. Vicki planned to finish the errands she had to undertake that day after lunch. She informed James that she would meet him in the parking lot following her shift that night. When James arrived in the parking lot following his workday, Vicki was not in sight. The vehicle was still missing. After waiting until dusk, James started to worry because Vicki was nowhere to be seen. That night, he attempted to contact a few of Vicki's close friends and relatives to inquire about any updates on her whereabouts, but none of them knew. After returning home, James waited for Vicki for hours, but she never appeared. On August 28, 1979, James tried to report his girlfriend Vicki missing early to the Prince George's County Police Department. However, the officers told him that since Vicki was an adult, an official complaint could only be filed 72 hours after Vicki's appearance. James was left with no choice except to wait and hope Vicki returned. James broke the news to Vicki's relatives. They all started to worry a lot, especially Vicki's mother, Maydell. She couldn't believe what was occurring, so she went insane. Vicky's failure to check on her son and her odd lack of communication with her loved ones about her whereabouts were noteworthy. With her brave daughter gone, Maydell could only worry about what may come next. After a torturous 72 hours of waiting, Vicky's family came to the conclusion that something was gravely wrong as the day went on. On August 29, 1979, while out for a bike ride on Metropolitan Church Road, which is adjacent to Maryland's Route 227, a local adolescent lad noticed something unusual in the woods. When he looked it over more closely, he saw it was a dead body. He told his mother about the horrifying finding after riding his bike home, and she called the police. Police found a dead woman who had been shot in the head and was only half clad when they got at the site. The body of the woman was identified as Vicky Lynn Belk after she was brought to Baltimore's chief medical examiner. The official cause of death was homicide. The Charles County Sheriff's Office called Vicky's parents, Maydell and Lonnie, to let them know that they needed to come to the police department because they had some information regarding their daughter. It turned out that Lonnie and Maydell were quite cheerful on their trip to the police station. They thought maybe Vicky had been hurt recently and had been found. But when Maydell and Lonnie arrived at the sheriff's station, they were told the worst news. Their firstborn child, their eldest daughter, had been murdered and left for dead by the side of the road. Maydell was in so much anguish that she burst into tears right away. The man who had harmed her daughter was cursed by her. Vicky's family was inconsolable. The violent and chaotic nature of the incident deeply shocked them. They collected themselves and gave the case to the cops, hoping that Vicky's killer would be caught and treated justly. An investigation into the killing was initiated. Detectives were constantly gathering evidence and searching for clues, and the crime scene had already been secured. Among the things the investigators discovered were Vicky's brown shoes, stockings, jewelry, bra, and slip-and dress. A few hair samples and nail clippings were also discovered. The objects found at the crime scene were tested multiple times, but they turned out to be of little assistance to the investigators. The police conducted multiple interviews with Vicky's family, friends, and anyone who were close to the crime site. Even when certain leads were pursued, the inquiry didn't seem to be moving further. The day before she disappeared, Vicky had borrowed James's car to run errands, and the investigators were still looking for it, hoping it held clues that would lead them to her killer. After a few days, James's Buick was found abandoned in Washington, D.C. Sadly, unfortunately, the murderer's trail was entirely covered up. The police were determined to find Vicky's killer even if there was little new information in the case. All of the evidence was stored with the expectation that it may be retested using more advanced equipment. Over the next few years, as more and more cutting-edge technologies were being introduced, Charles County detectives worked with the Maryland State Police, Bode Technology in Lorton, Virginia, and Sorensen's Laboratories in Salt Lake City, Utah, in an effort to identify Vicky's killer and bring him to justice. But they encountered failure once more. The more time went by, the more the investigation into Vicky's attack and murder slowed along, and the identity of her killer remained a mystery. When Vicky was slain in 1979, there was insufficient technology and equipment available to examine DNA samples. The technology was first developed in the 1980s when law enforcement started to gather a large database of DNA samples and fingerprints from criminal suspects all around the country. Investigators in Vicky's case retested the material after DNA testing advanced a bit in the early 2000s. Upon closer inspection, it was discovered that Vicky's garment had an alien body material on it. As a result, the detectives were able to construct a potential suspect's profile. However, testing technology was far from perfect. Therefore, the generated profile was not suitable to be entered into any database or compared to any suspects. Years passed, and the detectives kept testing Vicky's belongings that they had found at the crime site using new technologies. Using forensic technology, the investigators were able to construct a DNA profile of a male whose body fluids were found on Vicky's dress in 2022 when her slip and dress were retested. This offered police enforcement some hope that the person who killed Vicky would be found and brought to justice. A comparison was made between the newly developed male profile and profiles in CODIS, the combined DNA index system. After carefully reviewing multiple profiles, the forensic team found a match in their database. The 61-year-old man named Andrew Taylor was the proprietor of this profile. Following notification of the findings to the sheriff's office in November 2022, investigators decided to look into Andrew's background, particularly his criminal history. Andrew, who is now elderly, was living in a rehabilitation and nursing home in Washington, D.C. at the time. Through close observation and relentless inquiry into his past, the police learned that Andrew had been living in his aunt's Charles County home when Vicky was killed. Even though Vicky's body was found less than 4 miles from the residence, Andrew eluded capture despite this information. The investigators still needed more solid evidence to link him to the horrific crime. In order to accomplish this, detectives went into Andrew's assisted living facility in March 2023 and acquired an arrest warrant for him. In order to obtain additional evidence, detectives questioned Andrew and collected a sample of his saliva for further comparison with the DNA recovered from the crime scene. Andrew knew from the surprise visit that he was being investigated for Vicky's murder, but the police weren't worried that he would flee the city because of his health. Even though the lab tests would take weeks to complete and the results would not be available, authorities knew he was staying put. Andrew's condition was quickly getting worse, and his amputated leg made it difficult for him to do much of anything. The confirmation of the DNA match with Andrew's profile was made again on June 16, 2023. He was accused of assault and first-degree murder. He was detained and given an order to be held without bond on June 22, 2023. At a press conference, Vicky's family and the detectives who worked her case spoke with the media. Vicky's family was devastated, living in the past as the results of the probe brought back bad memories. Judy Belk shared a fond recollection of her late sister, Vicky, and Lament Belk thanked the police. Ricky Belk, Vicky's brother, told of what transpired to his mother following the sad incident. Currently, it's unclear if Andrew has entered a plea. The Maryland Public Defender Office, who is representing him, chose not to comment on the situation. Vicky had never seen Andrew before, and his attack on her had not been prearranged. When Andrew did the heinous deed, he was just 18. Vicky was denied the chance to have a happy and meaningful life. Her death left her loved ones extremely devastated, but they also found some peace and closure knowing that her killer was now behind bars. Lament Belk, Vicky's son, graduated from Morehouse College and George Mason University School of Law in 2009 and became Cobb County, Georgia's Associate Director Attorney. Vicky's sister Kay worked as a surgeon for the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office in California until she retired. Lonnie is a lieutenant in the Fairfax County Fire and Rescue Department, the only boy among several sisters. The Bell family created the Vicky Belk Scholarship Foundation in 1980 in memory of Vicky after her tragic death. The foundation grants scholarships in Vicky's honor. The mission of the Scholarship Board is to provide opportunities that continue Vicky Lynn Belk's legacy and assist in raising funds for graduating seniors at Oakland Baptist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, the church where she was baptized. So far, the scholarship program has awarded scholarships to almost 100 students from Oakland Baptist Church. Vicky's family wishes to continue her love of education among the youngsters of Oakland Baptist Church. Moving on to the next case. Thelma Boinville. On December 7, 2017, the sleepy Hawaii town of Pubkea on the North Shore learned of a dark secret. A horrible catastrophe shook the quaint suburb that day. The story of Thelma Boinville, a loving 51-year-old teacher, begins here. Until she accepted a part-time job cleaning holiday rentals, her life was typical. She had no idea that the typical day she was leading would turn into a nightmare that would change everyone around her. At a vacation home on Ke'ehi Road, the renters discovered her dead. As information surfaced, the community was engulfed in a web of unanswered questions, dread, and a desire for the truth. How did Thelma Boinville, an ordinary teacher in a sleepy Hawaiian hamlet, meet her horrifying end? What shocking revelations might we expect? Was her death caused by an accident or by murder? Thelma Boinville was inevitably impacted by Pupkia, a quaint community in Hawaii's North Shore's Kalawa district. In Hawaiian, a white shell that completely captures its immaculate surroundings is called a pupkia. Beautiful beaches in Pupkia are widely recognized for drawing surfers and beachgoers. This includes beaches like Waimea Bay and Sunset Beach. Three Tables and Sharks Cove are also great places to go snorkeling and diving. The village is tranquil, but because Thelma had to support her family, Pupki severely changed her life, leaving a long-lasting effect on the neighborhood. The people of Hawaii's North Shore knew Thelma Boinville well as a loving mother and teacher. She was born in a small Brazilian town on February 4, 1966. Throughout her life, her curiosity and passion for learning remained central to who she was as a person. Thelma began her career at Sunset Beach Elementary School as a teacher. She wished to assist others as well as her kids. She recognized the value of education in fostering healthy brain development in children. Thelma thought that teaching was her ministry. Her commitment to teaching youngsters was well respected by her colleagues. Her classroom gently and supportively supported and nourished growing minds over time. Thelma was a dedicated teacher who went above and beyond to promote her students' achievement, according to her colleagues. Thelma's family came first in her mind. Despite her employment as a teacher, she worked part-time as a cleaner for North Shore Holiday Rentals to support her family. This demonstrated her strong work ethic and her dedication to her family. Thelma had a daughter named Miakana who was very important to her when she married Kevin Emery. Miakana was her friend, confidant, and child. Their close relationship demonstrated Thelma's unconditional love and nurturing nature. Miakana turned to her mother for advice and encouragement. The village was forever altered by her presence, kindness, and love for her family and students. Unfortunately, she had no idea that fate had unexpectedly and disastrously turned against her. Beneath the idyllic surface of North Shore, Hawaii, was a horrific and unexpected catastrophe. Thelma Boinville was a dedicated educator. She enjoyed the solitude of North Shore. To support her family, she had a second job cleaning vacation houses in the region. She arrived at a vacation home on Ke'ehi Road, a typical neighborhood that had gained notoriety for its terrifying nature. Without Thelma knowing, this picture-perfect scene was turned upside down in the most surprising way. Thelma had cleaning responsibilities for the holiday rental while her 8-year-old daughter McKenna slept outside in the family van. Thelma Boinville had suffered violent incidents inexplicably while staying at the holiday rental. The rental house was being broken into by Stephen Brown and his girlfriend, Haley Dangerand, when she arrived. Something terrible happened on a regular workday that completely upended Thelma's life. Thelma attempted to repel the intruders, but as the struggle intensified, she was struck severely in the head. A violent act that seemed out of place occurred on the peaceful North Shore. Thelma waged a terrible battle for her life in the tranquility of the vacation house before she was taken from us. Her skull was brutally damaged by blunt force trauma, which was a sign of violence. She left a menacing trail of blood as evidence of the violence that had taken her life. The fear lingered even there. McKenna, her 8-year-old daughter, was unaware of the darkness. Her mother's return was always something she looked forward to. Her tranquility was short-lived when McCanna came under the attention of Haley Dangerand and Stephen Brown, two nasty crooks. She was put in a gag and restrained in the holiday rental, which sent her into a nightmare that no child should ever experience. Her trusting and innocent world came crashing down. The blackness of her kidnapper's wrath replaced the glorious Hawaiian light that had filled the automobile she was waiting in. Haley Dangerand and Stephen Brown tricked, physically restrained, and silenced McCanna. The small girl was forcibly told that her mother, Thelma Boinville, had died. McConnell's world collapsed around her, mercilessly shattering her innocence. Another horrific chapter in this terrible story of brutality and deception involved McConnell being kidnapped and given awful lies to eat. Stephen Brown and Haley Dangerand killed Thelma Boinville and seriously injured her as well. Officers conducting an investigation at the vacation home on Kiki Road in North Shore, Hawaii, discovered Thelma Boinville's lifeless body at approximately 3:20 p.m. local time following the report of the incident. Thelma was the target of a horrible murder. The kidnapping of McCanna, Thelma Boinville's daughter, and the case of her mother inspired a thorough inquiry aimed at achieving justice. Many lives were impacted that day by a distress call that the Honolulu Police Department and other law enforcement agencies received. Police found a terrible tragedy at the holiday rental on Keiki Road when they arrived. When they entered the rental, they found Thelma Boinville dead. A grim picture of what had happened inside was created by bloodstains and fight-related debris. The crime site was thoroughly examined before the inquiry began. Every bit of evidence was meticulously documented by forensic specialists who thoroughly inspected the holiday rental. Rebuilding Thelma's case and McCanna's kidnapping was the primary goal. The blunt force injuries to Thelma's head was a crucial piece of evidence recovered from the scene. This graphic detail highlighted how serious the crime was. Following their witness search, investigators had a conversation with McConnell. To safeguard her mental health, experts, including child psychologists, were consulted as she recounted that horrible day. McCanna's story was recorded in case it provided any hints about the enigmatic solution. Her memories of the offenders, their deeds, and their horrifying dishonesty bolstered the case. The world record for the greatest wave was set by Garrett McNamara, an American big wave surfer and Thelma's brother-in-law. McNamara was the first to ride a glacier wave and handle a barrel from Jaws. Owing to his moniker and Guinness World Records, he possessed a substantial social media following. Things improved after surfer Garrett McNamara posted an impassioned Facebook video and offered a substantial reward for the suspect's capture. In the video, McNamara, who claimed to be Thelma Boinville's daughter, offered $100,000 to anyone who could provide information regarding the horrifying murder that took place on Hawaii's North Shore at Keiki Beach. His passionate plea was extensively disseminated on social media. By threatening to give a large reward, he urged others to come forward with information. You may contribute to raising awareness of the need to resolve the case and prosecute the culprits by signing this petition. After McNamara's video went viral and raised public notice of the tragedy, many people provided leads, tips, and information. This information was very helpful to law enforcement in locating and apprehending the criminals. It was law enforcement that started the legal process. A thorough investigation was started by the Honolulu Police Department in an effort to identify and quickly catch the perpetrators. At the vacation house on Keiki Road, where the offender was caught, significant clues were found. The vacation house was meticulously searched by detectives looking for evidence of the murderer. They collected DNA fingerprints and other forensic evidence methodically in order to create a case against the criminal. As the research went on, the puzzle pieces started to fit. Witnesses like Thelma's daughter McCanna helped piece together what happened. Makana's horrific story of her mother's murder and imprisonment revealed the culprit. Thanks to generous donations, increasing media attention, and McNamara's generous reward offer, the investigation was able to apprehend the murders, Stephen Brown and Haley Dandurand. Stephen Brown was one of the primary suspects in Thelma Boinville's murder. His presence at the crime site and his involvement in the deadly burglary led to his incrimination when witness accounts, investigations, and forensic evidence were gathered. Stephen Brown was placed under arrest on December 8, 2017, just 7 hours later, in order to pursue justice. The arrest once again shocked the neighborhood, but this time it was accompanied by optimism and a pledge to hold the offenders accountable. Stephen Brown's testimony provided further insight into that very fatal day as the investigation progressed. Brown stated that he and Dandurand smoked marijuana before entering the vacation home through an open window. Thelma was instructed to lie down by Dandurand so that they could bind her when she entered. Brown's testimony raised questions for the investigators. Thelma did not appear to be defending himself based on his wounds or his bloody garments. Brown's horrifying narrative contradicted McKenna's. Deputy Prosecutor Scott Bell was certain that Brown alone could bring Thelma Boinville under control. Because of McKenna's claim that Brown told her they killed her mother, the inquiry was compromised. A complicated web of treachery, bloodshed, and grief in the bucolic North Shore. Justice seemed imminent as the parts of the jigsaw puzzle began to come together. Stephen Brown, the horrifying killer, came from a chaotic and violent family. Stephen Brown was 23 years old when he killed Thelma, who was born in 1994. His early legal troubles painted a bleak image of a young guy headed down a horrible path. Brown's severe criminal history makes it reasonable to be concerned about his potential for aggressiveness. Investigators probing his past were wary of this trajectory. Brown's girlfriend at the time of the crime, Haley Dandurand, was a mysterious 1997 native. She was 20 years old when the crime was committed. Dandurand's involvement in the terrible events of that day perplexed a lot of people. Stephen Brown was convicted of 2 kidnappings, murder, and burglary after a trial. The first of his act's consequences was his punishment. The legal process began following the arrest. The prosecution put together a strong case using witness statements, evidence from the crime site, and McConnell's graphic testimony. The trial became a struggle for justice, and the truth after the crime was made public. The jury rendered their verdict following a 6-year trial that detailed the grisly deaths and the events of that horrific day. Stephen Brown was convicted of assassination, kidnapping, and burglary after a contentious trial. Both the family of Thelma Boinville and the North Shore community found closure. Stephen Brown's legal path began with his conviction. He accepted his fate even though he knew he would most likely spend the rest of his days in prison. Justice was done. Both Thelma's family and the neighborhood would be scarred by the atrocity. The courtroom was buzzing with intense anticipation after a 2-week trial that captured the attention of the country and the North Shore. On Friday, January 20th, 2023, after a protracted trial, a jury comprised of 12 members with a variety of backgrounds delivered its verdict. Popke was a quiet village until the legal drama surrounding Stephen Brown, the main suspect in Thelma Boinville's murder in December 2017. The jury's decision changed the case after the trial lasted less than 30 minutes. Stephen Brown was acknowledged as having a major role in the sad events of that December day, even though he was convicted guilty of multiple offenses. Brown's accusations included 2 kidnappings, 1 burglary, and a 2nd decree killing in addition to his conviction for homicide. However, he received a life sentence without the chance of release. The ruling was overturned by the court. The prosecution carefully constructed its case by offering testimony and corroborating evidence that gave a graphic account of the events that took place at the vacation home on Kiki Road. Scott Bell, the deputy prosecutor, was adamant that Thelma Boinville was killed by Haley Dangarand and Stephen Brown. The prosecution claimed that Brown was able to physically restrain Thelma. The defense claimed that Stephen Brown was behind the break-in and kidnapping, despite his strenuous denials of any role in the murder. A court-appointed council member for Brown, William Bagasol, highlighted in the tragedy the differences between Brown and his girlfriend Haley Dangarand. Methodically, Bagasol revealed that Thelma had been tied up by Haley, who had no blood. Furthermore, he did not believe that Brown's DNA was connected to the weapons that were used to kill Thelma. Courtrooms functioned as settings for opposing narratives as well as emotional theaters. The population, stunned by Thelma Boinville's brutal murder, anxiously awaited the trial's verdict. The conviction and length of the trial tested the patience of the North Shore neighborhood. Following Stephen Brown's conviction, Thelma Boinville and her family experienced a major turning point in their search for justice after 27 shocks. The conviction gave the terrified community closure and paved the stage for the trial of Haley Dangarand, the second suspect in the case. The trial for Haley Dangarand started in July 2023. She was found guilty of burglary, kidnapping, and murder after a month of trial. She was given a life sentence in jail with the possibility of release by the jury. After the verdict, the North Shore community breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that a difficult phase of their journey had ended. However, the anguish endured by Thelma Boinville and her daughter McCanna will forever act as a warning of the evil that may exist even in the most favorable of situations. After Stephen Brown and Haley Dangarand's trial, the North Shore community and Thelma Boinville's family felt at peace. Justice was done following years of suffering, ambiguity, and uncomfortable memories of December 2017. The family found comfort in the sentence after losing their mother and teacher. Their persistent pursuit of accountability and the truth was upheld by the verdict.
Moving on to the next case.
Sonia Stone. The 27th of May, 1951 saw the birth of Sonia Stone. Originally from Quebec, Canada, Sonia immigrated to the United States in the 1970s and married Michael Stone there in 1976. The couple gave birth to a girl. Sonia and Michael Stone's marriage, however, did not continue long as they separated and became divorced. While working for the Levi Strauss Company, Sonia Carmen Stone was a single mother in 1980, living alone with her 4-year-old daughter. After dropping her daughter off at school and doing a few errands, Sonia went back home on October 15, 1981. Sonia Carmen had a visit from her friend Caroline McBride at around 12 o'clock in the evening, after phoning her several times and not hearing back from her. When Caroline arrived at Sonia's home in the Carmel Point neighborhood in Monterey County, California, she discovered her friend Sonia Carmen Herrick's lifeless body right inside the front door that led to her living room. Sonia Carmen Horrock, 30, looked to be the victim of sexual assault. Her pocketbook and its contents were spilled near her body as she lay sprawled on the floor. Sonia had been found with her own pantyhose wrapped tightly around her neck, half-dressed and strangled. She had peeled back her jacket and ripped her shirt. Caroline was so scared that she dialed the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, and they sent officers to the location right away. The detectives concluded that Sonia was attacked as soon as she opened her front door to enter her house based on the posture in which she was discovered. Additionally, when they inspected Sonia Carmen's body, they found that she had a broken left ring fingernail with blood underneath, indicating that she had fought her killer and possibly even scratched him before she passed away. For years, the police and Sonia Carmen Herrock's family were plagued by the issue of who was responsible for the horrific crime. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. By the next day, the police had canvassed the neighborhood, asking questions and speaking with everyone who had answered the knock on their doors in an attempt to gather information. One of the detectives spoke with a neighbor named Michael Scott Glazebrook while they were in the neighborhood, that is, the neighborhood that is just across the street from Sonia Carmen's home. The detective saw a 3 to 4 inch vertical scratch running down his right cheek at the time. He was 25 years old. He was asked how and when he received the scratch right away by the detective, but Glazebrook said contradictory things. While he claimed his parents he acquired it in a fight at Monterey Peninsula College, where he attended school, he informed the detective he got it by cutting plexiglass in his garage. Michael Scott Glazebrook was held accountable for Sonia Carmen's death in 1982 because of his inconsistent behavior. However, the district attorney's office chose not to retry the case after the jury returned a 9-3 not guilty verdict at the 1983 trial. Whatever the jury's verdict, a retrial was still an option. But Michael Scott was freed and found not guilty. The case could not be investigated in the 1970s due to the lack of major DNA technology, and it remained unsolved for 39 years. The Sonia Carmen Stones case was re-examined in 2020 by detectives from the Monterey County Sheriff's Office and Deputy District Attorney Matt El Hero. They discovered that a number of the pieces of evidence in Sonia's case file might now be analyzed using contemporary DNA technology. The Department of Justice DNA Laboratory received these pieces of evidence, along with the DNA discovered beneath Sonia's fractured fingernail and on her right breast, for analysis. Investigators obtained a search warrant for a fresh sample of Michael Scott Glazebrook's DNA in 1981, since he was the top suspect on their list of potential suspects. Since Michael Scott Glazebrook was still working in Monterey County and was still alive, they had no trouble getting a new DNA profile. Following analysis, a DNA sample obtained from Michael Scott Glazebrook and one from the crime site belonging to Sonia Carmen Stone were compared. It turned out to be a contest right away. Subsequently, detectives monitored Michael Scott Glazebrook's home in the city of Seaside. On August 14, 2021, around 8 p.m., Glazebrook drove out of his house, but he was stopped and brought into custody. During Michael Scott Glazebrook's arrest, all cops donned Levi's jeans as a tribute to Stone. Glazebrook, now 67 years old, was found guilty of Sonia Carmine Stone's murder during an 8-day jury trial in 2023. He will be sentenced in April and might get a lifelong prison term without the chance of release. The 44-year-old daughter of Sonia Carmine Hiroke Stone remarked, "It's been a day that we have been waiting for a really long time," in response to Glazebrook's convictions. "We're delighted that Sonia received justice since she was a beautiful woman."
Moving on to the next case.
William Newton. William Newton's severed body parts were found in a West Hollywood dumpster in 1990 when he was 25 years old. The news of his murder rocked the small LGBT community to which he belonged, particularly as it came at a time when the HIV and AIDS epidemic was already taking a toll on the gay community. For over 3 decades, West Hollywood was plagued by this horrifying unsolved case. It was the Black Dahlia murder as told by the gay community. Investigators worked very hard throughout the years to solve the case, but they were unsuccessful for a long time. But 3 decades later, William Newton's case has been resolved by a group of amateur detectives. The case study for this case brings us to Los Angeles, widely regarded as the global hub for entertainment. Movie studios, the Sunset Strip, Venice Beach, renowned museums, theme parks, vineyards, breweries, outdoor activities, and a bustling nightlife are just a few of the many attractions and things to do in Los Angeles. People have found the city to be interesting over the years because it offers a lot to everyone. On July 26, 1965, William Arnold Newton was born in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. His parents lived apart and were not married. William's love for the arts was revealed as he grew older. Friends would frequently catch him penning poetry and other creative works that were a reflection of his soul and the natural world. William Newton considered himself to be an illustrative artist and poet, according to his friends. He possessed a great deal of talent. Richard Harriman, his father, once informed the press that his son was a bright young man. William Newton was born in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and lived there for the most of his childhood. He attended both junior high and primary school there. In 1979, after graduating from junior high school, he and his mother, whose name has never been mentioned in any records, moved to another Wisconsin community named Ladysmith. Their time in Ladysmith was brief, as William Newton and his mother relocated to Oklahoma City shortly after his first year of high school in 1980. William, who needed more stability, did not seem to be pleased with the abrupt and constant change in his surroundings. He then decided to move in with his father, Richard Harriman, and packed his belongings. He had the impression that his father would be overjoyed to have him. He was, after all, his son. However, such was not the case, as he received a startling welcome when arriving in Eau Claire, the home of his father. He was instructed to leave and return to his mother's house by his father. At 16 years old, William Newton felt crushed and shattered, but since he never gave thought to moving back in with his mother, William bravely decided to forge on and begin a new life on his own. William Newton traveled around the country for the next 3 years, arriving in Los Angeles in 1985. Oklahoma was one of the cities he called home. He met Terry Elliott there, and they struck up a romantic relationship during his visit. William decided to pursue a career as a professional beautician after discovering his love for makeup and beauty. He learned everything there was to know about makeup, skincare, and style. After finishing his training in cosmetics, he obtained his license as a beautician. William Newton began a new life in Los Angeles in 1984. Despite all of the difficulties and obstacles that come with relocating, William never had to wait long for possibilities. His strong resume, which highlighted his expertise as a beautician, helped him land a job in the entertainment sector making music videos very fast. William worked as a choreographer and a makeup artist. Not having a full-time career, he later got a second job at Hollywood Spa, a gay bathhouse. He met David Ray during a night shift, and the man liked his personality right away. David was rumored to have visited the area to judge a beauty pageant for a local homosexual publication. William's meeting with David served as just another stepping stone toward his professional zenith. Gay adult flicks were David Ray's specialty as an adult filmmaker. Seeing potential in William, David chose to support him, bringing him into the homosexual film industry and helping him get parts in a number of gay pornographic films. William and David's connection developed into much more than a business partnership over time. Following their romantic relationship, the two partnered to launch their own adult film company, London, in 1987. Ray produced content. William then began working in London. Ray worked as a set designer, makeup artist, and movie producer under the alias Bill A. London. Additionally, he performed in films under the identities Billy Porter and London. Ray Productions was a new company since London, and there wasn't much money to change the location of the film. In their apartment, David and William would film their films. William would frequently remodel the residence to make it special for each movie shoot. William and David began to lead the greatest lives possible as their film production began to take off and money began to flow. When they weren't filming, they would frequently go out to bars and clubs where they would party and enjoy themselves. This way of life persisted for many years until the two separated and began living apart in 1990. William had already made preparations to temporarily leave Los Angeles and relocate to Las Vegas. where his stepsister Michelle was living at the time, which was around October 1990. William, according to his sister, was in need of a mental health vacation at the time. He would have the chance to reconnect with his mother, who was planning to relocate to the area at the moment, in addition to taking advantage of the fresh and exciting chances that Las Vegas would present. But fate had other ideas for William, who never boarded the plane to Las Vegas despite having made plans and used his final days in Los Angeles to get ready for his departure. Rage Nightclub was a well-known nightclub in Los Angeles that William Newton visited one fateful October 28, 1990. He sat for a while in his preferred location in the club, enjoying his drink and watching people around him dance and have a good time. He felt liberated after a few shots and chose to join the group of clubgoers who were dancing and having a good time. As he partied into the night, letting free and enjoying himself, time passed quickly. After taking a few more photographs, he made the decision to head home as it was becoming late. He got up, stumbled, and made his way out of the nightclub. It was obvious to everyone who saw him that he was drunk. William managed to escape via the exit doors, but after that night he was never seen alive again. It looked like Monday the next day, and the people of Los Angeles began a new week, going about their regular business, completely unaware of the horrific murder that had taken place the night before. On October 29, 1990, that same morning, a homeless individual was going through the nearby dumpsters in an alley just behind Santa Monica Boulevard. He was either hunting for food to eat or just trash to locate. He went one by one up to the dumpsters. When he opened a specific dumpster, he found a plastic bag that looked rather sturdy. He ripped the package open, and the sight within completely shocked him. There was a human head and feet staring back at him. He'd searched dumpsters for years, but he had never seen anything so horrifying and terrible. He promptly secured the bin and informed onlookers of the horrifying finding. When the police eventually arrived at the site, they were able to positively identify William's severed head from the bin. In order to determine whether any more portions of William Newton's body could be located and recovered, the police investigated every other dumpster within a 2-mile radius of the finding site. But every search turned up fruitless. William was found to have been high on methamphetamine, an addictive narcotic, according to the results of his autopsy. In addition, the forensics found that prior to his murder, he had suffered blunt force injuries to his head and had been strangled. One of the investigators who arrived at the site and was horrified by how gruesomely William Newton's body had been disfigured was Wendy Byrne, a retired detective. Despite the fact that William was gay and employed in the gay adult film industry, she expressed her horror at the possibility of something like that happening. According to Wendy Burns, it didn't concern her. He wasn't deserving of dying in this terrible way. Following that, the Los Angeles Police Department launched an investigation into William Newton's case in an attempt to find information and leads that would clarify his specific circumstances and explain why his body parts ended up in a dumpster. The lead investigator on the team was Wendy Byrne. She ensured that she and her group gave William Newton's case their all, working non-stop. Investigators received hundreds of tips and leads about the case in the days and months after William Newton's body parts were discovered, but every lead resulted in a dead end. William Newton's remains were discovered in a neighborhood where investigators conducted interviews, but no one seemed to know who killed him or where his remaining body parts were located. After depleting all leads and tips, the investigators were left with nothing concrete to work with, and William Newton's case finally remained cold for an extended period of time. In 2005, 15 years after the murder, the Los Angeles Police Department made a public announcement announcing that they were going to reopen and reinvestigate the cold case of William Newton. They asked the public for leads and tips. However, the inquiry ultimately produced no useful results, and the case eventually became unsolved. But toward the end of 2006, Los Angeles reporter Mickey Ski reported that Richard Harriman had contacted him, telling him that the Los Angeles Police Department had not followed up on solving his son's murder case. This brought attention back to William Newton's case. After learning of this, the Los Angeles Police Department made a public statement stating that they were still actively working to solve the William Newton murder case and that they have not forgotten about it. In the unlikely event that the police wanted to notify Richard Harriman of any updates on his son's case, he had left an email address for contact. Sadly, he was unable to witness justice being served for his son's murder, since on May 30th, 2011, he passed away at the age of 65 in his home. In 2020, two gay authors and best friends, Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn, were podcast hosts who became interested in William Newton's unsolved case. Christopher read about the case in an adult entertainment magazine, which is how they learned about it. Their imaginations had been fixated on the case ever since. They jointly started their podcast program, The Dinner Party Show, in 2012. Christopher Rice chose to bring up the William Newton case and the fact that there hasn't been an arrest since 1990 in one of the show's 2020 episodes. Christopher then made a last-minute plea to the audience to come forward with information or leads that could help William Newton's case get resolved. After a few months, Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn conducted another episode on William Newton's case in which they discussed all the new information they had learned about the case since their previous one. In the program, Christopher also shared that he received a message from a man named Ron Wheeler, who said he had crucial information about the case. Ron Wheeler revealed to the podcasters that he had also been at the Rage nightclub on October 28, 1990, the same night William Newton had gone before he was killed. He claimed to have witnessed William exiting the club with a different man who resembled renowned American gay serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Before being apprehended in 1991, 9 months after the horrifying murder of William Newton, Jeffrey Dahmer had killed 17 boys and men in the Milwaukee region between the 1970s and the 1990s. After that, he received 16 life sentences. Although Jeffrey Dahmer's profile suggested that he might have killed William Newton, it was impossible to verify that since he had already passed away in jail in November 1994 after being attacked and beaten to death by another inmate. Following his disclosure of the information he and Eric Shaw Quinn had uncovered regarding William Newton's case and its potential connection to Jeffrey Dahmer, Christopher Rice expressed hope that someone would soon get in touch with them with information and proof that would enable them to apprehend William Newton's killer. Detective John Lamberti became interested in the William Newton case about the same period. After reviewing every piece of evidence, document, and file his forebears had utilized, he was taken aback by how much work they had put into the case. John Lamberti then started examining the case in great detail from all aspects, using the work of his predecessors as a reference. While looking into the case, he Googled William Newton's name and found the most recent podcast episode featuring Eric Shaw Quinn and Christopher Rice, who theorized that Jeffrey Dahmer was William Newton's murderer. After listening to the program, Detective John Lamberti became more intrigued by the case. He then got in touch with Christopher and Eric to arrange a meeting. 3 of them spoke in depth about the subject at the meeting, revealing what they knew about it. By the end of the meeting, they both agreed that the mystery surrounding William Newton's murder case needed to be solved. It seems that the 3 men were not the only ones who found William Newton's case intriguing. At around the same time, Rachel Mason, a documentary filmmaker, became interested in the case and began working on an underground investigation. While working on a well-liked Netflix documentary about a gay adult bookstore called The Circus of Books in 2017, Rachel coincidentally learned of William Newton's death. In search of real, substantial material for the documentary, She went to see local writer and activist Mike Zimanski. Mike agreed to let her go through all of his old collections of West Hollywood pictures. An article on William Newton's murder case from 1990 accidentally slipped out while Rachel and Mike looked through the notebooks and photo album. Rachel couldn't stop staring at it. She snatched it up and saw that the article discussed William's murder and the fact that no one had been arrested as of yet. When she requested Mike for further details on the case, he kindly gave her the rundown on what he knew so far. Rachel Mason became interested in the case right away, but she had to finish the documentary for Circus of Books first. After completing the documentary, she started searching for other projects to work on. Then she recalled reading about William Newton's situation in an article at Mike's place. She gradually started to examine the case in greater detail, and eventually she developed an obsession with it. She made the decision to begin her own covert investigation as she couldn't stop thinking about the issue. She was determined to gather all the information necessary to resolve the issue while she was at it. Then, on a Facebook page for a gay community group, Rachel made a public appeal for anyone with helpful information or ideas that could lead to the resolution of William Newton's case. She also requested information on Jeffrey Dahmer's whereabouts during the 1990s William Newton murder incident. After some time, she got a message from a Sherman Oaks resident called Clark Williams. Married and a stay-at-home father of 2 LGBT children, Clark Williams claimed to be bored after his daughter departed for college and used a Facebook group dedicated to Wisconsin's gay history to rekindle old friendships. Similar to William Newton, Clark Williams grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and became interested in solving the case because he thought he could help Rachel Mason fill in the details of William Newton's lifestyle prior to his passing because he had a unique perspective on what it was like to be a gay child growing up in Wisconsin at the time. Then he contacted Rachel to inform her that Jeffrey Dahmer had never killed anyone outside of Milwaukee and Ohio. Rachel Mason was happy about the latest development in the case and appreciated the tip. She sought someone who understood a lot or little about William Newton's life story because she planned to write a documentary on his case. She got in touch with Clark Williams right away to see what he had to say. Clark Williams said at the meeting that he felt a connection to William Newton's case because of their common experiences after reading about it on a Facebook forum. They were born in the same year, which was another thing that made them gay. Clark stated, "We were born only a week apart." There was no denying Clark's emotional connection to the case. That's the reason he decided to step in and provide his assistance in whatever manner he could. Billy Newton was a genuine individual, someone who lives in my neighborhood. Additionally, I wanted to treat Billy fairly. Clark informed the reporters that he wanted to be remembered for his life as much as his death. Thousands of gay men in America lost their lives in 1990 as a result of the AIDS crisis, and William Newton's murder was a reflection of the lives of many gay men and youths at the time. He assured Rachel that he would personally devote more attention to the investigation after telling her everything he knew about the LGBT community at the time of William Newton's death. In 1990, he traveled to Fresno, the mother of Jeffrey Dahmer, and asked acquaintances in Milwaukee some questions that would help solve William Newton's case, but he received no response. When Clark Williams follows up on a lead in the investigation, he gets in contact with Detective John Lamberti. After that, John Lamberti, who was appreciative of the work, included Clark and Rachel in the inquiry. Because the Los Angeles Police Department lacked the tools necessary to crack the case at the time. In his free time, Clark would frequently sit down to study William Newton's case. Having worked in gay adult films, Clark decided to change his attention and go into the world of gay pornography in an attempt to find any leads. Soon after, he came upon Rick Pasquay, who had pretended to be a private detective investigating William Newton's death at the time of the murder. However, he never revealed that he had spent 20 years working in the gay porn industry. Clark started looking into the life of Rick Pasquay. he learned that The Devil and Danny Webster was a pornographic movie he had directed, and that his true name was Richard Lawrence. This gave Clark the advantage he needed to win the case. Rick Pasquez and William Newton had been employed in the same business in 1990. Thus, he made the decision to get in touch with Pasquez to ask for advice on what might have happened to William Newton. But Rick Pasquez had now passed away, so Clark was unable to speak with him. But he did his homework on the characters of the movie he directed, searching for people who could be living and willing to narrate tales about William Newton's life. Subsequently, he saw that the film had a still living individual named Billy Houston. After conducting a thorough investigation into Billy Houston's biography, Clark found that he was a fresh and exciting addition to the gay adult film industry. Darrell Lynn Madden was his true name. Subsequent investigation showed that Darrell Lynn Madden was still alive and incarcerated on life sentences after murdering Bradley Qualls, one of his friends, and 2 other gay males. When Darrell and Bradley Qualls went out one fateful night with a threatening plot to initiate Bradley Qualls into their skinhead cult group, the Chaos Squad Skinheads, Darrell claimed that they had committed the first murder. They had to kidnap and murder a gay man for the initiation in order to accomplish this. Then, Darrell and Bradley quietly waited for the poor gay man to pass by while lurking about the streets of Oklahoma. Eventually, one Stephen Domer fell victim to their death trap. Then, Darrell and Bradley tricked Stephen into going to a desolate place. He was handcuffed in his own vehicle and driven to a location where he would be easily assassinated. Stephen pleaded, cried, and struggled to have his life spared. However, he was ultimately defeated by 2 strong guys who used his own coat hanger to strangle him to death. Darrell and Bradley killed him and dumped his body in a nearby creek. Then, in a startling change of events, Darrell pointed a gun at his friend and accomplice, Bradley, murdering him instantly for an unidentified cause. After that, Darrell left Bradley's body behind and ran off. Nevertheless, he was unable to conceal his misdeeds for very long, as he was apprehended and forced to deal with the fallout. After being deeply taken aback by Darrell Lynn Madden's character, Clark Williams resolved to learn more about his life in Oklahoma. Afterwards, he discovered that Darrell had previously participated in an interview for the book American Honor Killings. Because of the book's limited availability, Clark chose to order it in order to read it and gain insight into William Newton's situation. Before Clark could eventually receive it at his doorstep, he had to wait for quite some time. Clark snatched up the book with excitement and started turning the pages. He was taken aback by what he eventually read. Darrell Lynn Madden discussed killing another gay guy in Los Angeles during the interview, in addition to killing Bradley Qualls and Stephen Domer. However, he omitted information about the crime from the book. However, given that William Newton was gay and had died in Los Angeles, Clark was ecstatic that Darrell might be alluding to him. Clark fervently believed that the murderer of William Newton was going to be identified at last. Clark called investigator John Lombardi to confirm this information, and they met to go over what Clark had discovered. 2 weeks before to Clark's report, John Lombardi's cold case section had reopened the William Newton file. Needless to say, he wasted no time in alerting his colleagues to the latest development in the case. They set to work, conducting study on Darrell Lynn Madden's lifestyle in 1990. During their investigation, they learned that the gay film company Darrell was employed for at the time was situated on Santa Monica Boulevard, which seemed to be the same route where William Newton's body parts were discovered. The leads were starting to pile up. However, on January 4, 2023, Detective John Lamberti traveled to Oklahoma, where Darrell was serving a life sentence for his crimes, along with Detective Tamara Momias, in order to gather information. Upon arriving at the prison, they discovered that Darrell Lynn Madden had transformed into a proud transgender woman named Darrellyn and was now an Orthodox Jew. She was willing to respond to any questions the two detectives threw at her as she sat comfortably across from them. When Lombardi and Momius questioned Darylyn about William Newton's murder during the interview, they were taken aback by how quickly she was able to recall his identity. Darylyn reported to the detectives that she and her friends, who were skinheads, had seen William strolling down the street the evening of his murder in October 1990. She clarified that they thought William would be a simple mark for robbery because of his apparent inebriation. Daryl acknowledged that she had gone up to William, put her hands around his shoulders, and whispered to him that they were going to abduct, rob, and hopefully beat the very hell out of him. But as long as he didn't cry out for aid or make a commotion, he would get out of the situation alive. The coroner at the scene verified that she had actually killed him by strangulation. Thus, regrettably, the last statement was false before his body was dismembered. When Darylyn told detectives Lombardi and Momius about the incident, they were confused. They went on to question her about the reason for William Newton's body being cut up and dumped in a dumpster. But Darylyn insisted it had nothing to do with her. She claimed that when they killed William, she left his body with her companions. Darylyn declined to provide the names or identities of the two acquaintances when the investigators asked for them, claiming, "I might be a murderer, but I am not a snitch." Detective John Lamberti, who already had all he needed to solve the William Newton case, submitted a strong case against Darylyn to Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon's office in the days that followed her confession. To their dismay, George Gascon informed them that there was insufficient evidence to indict Darylyn. Thus, they would not be pressing any charges against her. Detective John Lamberti and other amateur investigators who had put in many hours on the investigation were nevertheless pleased that William Newton's case had been resolved and that his perpetrator was now serving a life sentence. This was despite the tragic conclusion of the case. When the investigation was eventually concluded, Michelle Oliver, William Newton's stepsister, expressed her gratitude for the investigators' and amateur sleuths' efforts in looking into her brother's death. Michelle mentioned that having some sort of closure is helpful. The bereaved sister, however, was still in search of explanations for why Darylyn and her companions had targeted her brother and the location of the remaining body parts.
Moving on to the next case.
Marlene Warren. Marlene Warren had no idea that the clown outside her door bringing balloons and flowers was actually a murderer with a revolver concealed in his outfit. For more than 30 years, the killer clown case remained unsolved for investigators, Floridians, and fans of true crime across the globe. The date of Marlene Warren's birth is April 15, 1950. She married Michael Warren, who was 19 years old when she turned 22. Marlene had 2 children from her first marriage, and it seemed like Michael saw her 2 young lads as his own. Together, the couple developed as they put in a lot of effort and became well known. They acquired several businesses, one of which was Michael's used car dealership. The family's multiple sources of income allowed them to keep up a respectable standard of living. Their lives were so good that they could buy a 6,500 square foot home in the exclusive Aero Club suburb of Wellington, Florida. Every residence in this neighborhood has a runway and hangar of its own, allowing the homeowners to use their personal aircraft whenever they like. The Warrens gave the impression of having everything. Yet, this was not the case at all. In 1983, Michael ran into legal issues at his car dealership. After he was accused by customers of tampering with the odometer, he was taken into custody by the police. As a result, he was placed on probation for 18 months. It was well known by 1990 that the Warrens were having marital problems. One of Michael's employees, Sheila Keene, was supposedly involved in an affair with him. Sheila's husband chose to divorce her in spite of Sheila and Michael's denials of these claims. A white Chrysler LeBaron without a license plate drove down the block where Michael and Marlene lived on May 26, 1990. While in the kitchen with a friend, Marlene noticed someone dressed as a clown approaching the front door with a basket filled with balloons and flowers. Marlene was raised in a family that loved clowns. Her mother has an entire room full of collectible clowns because her family loved clowns so much. Marlene, who was 14 years old, had painted clowns. Marlene ran to the front door to greet her guest, much to the delight of clowns. Joseph Aarons, her son, who was present at the time, remembered hearing his mother say something like, "How pretty." This seemed to be Marlene's final remarks, since shortly after there was a pop sound that was heard by everyone in the home, including Joseph's visiting guests. They initially believed the noise to be the popping of a balloon, but then they saw Marlene fall to the floor. Everyone raced to the door, attentive now. The clown strolled back to the white Chrysler LeBaron, leaving the balloons and flowers behind. Joseph attempted to chase the clown, but his leg cast prevented him from going too far. But he did remember telling the clown to turn around with a loud voice. The clown pivoted and bestowed onto him a brown, wide-eyed glare. There was no expression on its face. Soon after, the clown got into the white LeBron and drove off. Witnesses only described Marlene's wounds as having been caused by a clown with brown eyes. They didn't even know the clown's gender. After attempting to pursue the clown in their own vehicle, Joseph and a friend lost sight of it. They hurried Marlene Warren to the hospital. She had been shot twice in the face at point-blank range, it was found. Despite her best efforts, she passed away in the hospital 2 days later. Michael Warren, who wasn't home when the event occurred, was checked in by detectives. Michael had a very good excuse. While traveling with companions to a racetrack in Miami, he received the devastating news. He returned home quickly to console the family. He cooperated with the investigation process by giving as much information as possible when questioned by the detectives. He was promptly excluded as a suspect. The authorities could not understand. In his 19 years as a law enforcement officer, a spokeswoman for the Palm Beach County Sheriff said that the killer clown case was the most bizarre thing he had ever seen. 2 hours following the homicide, police received a strong tip. A caller who desired to remain anonymous recommended that Sheila Keene and Michael Warren be interrogated in depth by the police. She hung up before the police could question her more. At the time of the murder, Michael was traveling with friends, but Sheila Keene was in town. Sheila worked as a repo person for Michael's dealership, despite her claims to have been at work. It wasn't exactly a strong alibi. A couple of days following the media attention surrounding Marlene Warren's murderous clown case, 2 staff members of the Spotlight, a local costume shop, told the authorities about an unusual encounter. They said that as they were ready to close up the business, one woman with cocoa brown hair approached them. She cried out to be let inside. She was told by the staff that they were closed and that she should return the next day. But she persisted, telling them that she actually required a costume for the evening. It was almost Labor Day weekend, so the request seemed odd given that it wasn't Halloween. Nevertheless, the 2 staff members were understanding and let her into the shop. It was alleged that she purchased an orange afro wig, white gloves, red nose, white makeup, and a clown costume. Later in the investigation, the 2 workers identified Sheila Keene from a picture lineup and said they were pretty sure it was Sheila who had shown up pleading for a clown outfit. The grocer that sold the balloons and flowers the clown had delivered to Marlene's home was the next place the police investigated. It was found that Sheila Keene's residence was in close proximity to the supermarket throughout that period. Also, Sheila was chosen from a lineup of pictures by the supermarket employees. Next on the list was the getaway car, a white Chrysler LeBaron. Michael Warren said he didn't know anything about the car when questioned. He said his dealership sold solely Chevrolets, but his chief competitor, Payless, owned a Chrysler LeBaron. There was a history of conflict between Michael and Payless, particularly about an advertisement that Michael's dealership ran that featured the word Payless and was said to be an attempt to mislead customers. Payless once rented out a white Chrysler LeBaron to a client who wasn't local. When it came time to return the vehicle, the customer looked up Payless's number but ultimately got in touch with Michael's dealership. According to the client, they were told to leave the car outside the dealership and put the keys inside the sun visor. But later on, the LeBaron disappeared. The clown's getaway car was left in a grocery store parking lot after the murder. Police found orange synthetic threads in the car that looked like the strands of a clown wig during their search. They also found long brown hairs. When Sheila Keene was murdered, her hair was long and chestnut. During a search warrant, the police discovered more orange synthetic hair strands inside her home. Everything looked like a straightforward matter to handle at this point, but it wasn't. Sheila and Michael angrily denied any involvement in Marlene's death. They denied speaking with police officers without an attorney present. In 1990, DNA testing was still in its infancy. Therefore, the investigators' only source of evidence was indirect evidence. While Michael's legal troubles grew, the inquiry into Marlene's murder was shelved. Michael's illegal business transactions were discovered during the course of the murder inquiry. Evidence of further odometer tampering and customer overcharging was found by the police. After one of the employees was taken into custody, Michael turned himself in to the authorities. After Michael's case went to trial in 1992, he received a 4-year prison sentence. Michael married Sheila Keene a few years after being freed in 2002. The couple opened a restaurant and made a fresh start in Tennessee. Sheila announced to the community that Debbie was her new name and that it was a nickname from her early years. Given the success of his new restaurant, Michael must be a skilled businessman. Due to their prosperity, the couple was able to move to Heron Point, a wealthy area at the border between Virginia and Tennessee. They got along well with their new neighbors and made many of pals. Few people in the area knew anything about their past. Since he was a teenager, Michael has operated eateries, he said to their new neighborhood. Michael gained from Marlene Warren's death as well. Marlene's son was not the beneficiary of her life insurance policy. It was him. His theft of more than $50,000 from Marlene's family left them with almost nothing. Though they had strong suspicions, detectives lacked hard evidence. Although Sheila and Michael were accused of the crime right away, a grand jury was never called to investigate their claims. Michael's friends had told the police earlier in the investigation that they had witnessed fights between him and Marlene and that Marlene had asked Sheila about her and Michael's extramarital affair. Above all, they said, Michael didn't appear to be very upset by Marlene's death. Because there were so many jigsaw pieces, detectives understood they just needed to fit them together. The key to the case was the DNA. In 1990, Sheila was given blood and hair samples by the police, but they were not equipped to examine them. The materials were stored in a cooler for more than 25 years. In 2013, police were able to revive the cold case of Marlene Warren because of a federal grant they were able to secure. They have attempted DNA testing before, but the results were not definitive. Thankfully, advances in technology have yielded enough proof to prosecute Sheila for Marlene's homicide. 5 minutes from their residence in September 2017, Michael and Sheila were pulled over by the police. They had no idea that the cold case of Marlene Warren had been revived. The police told them that Sheila Keene Warren had an arrest warrant out for her 27 years after the crime. Michael Warren continues to insist that Sheila and he are not involved. In an interview, Michael answered unequivocally that he was not involved in the murder of his first wife. He went on to say that if he had believed Sheila was involved in Marlene's death, he would not have been with her. Before Marlene was killed, a lawyer by the name of Christopher DeSantis told detectives about an interesting conversation he had with Michael Warren. According to DeSantis, Michael asked him what would happen in a hypothetical scenario in which a husband killed his wife. He remembered telling Michael that if the murder was carried out by one of his friends, the husband would not be held accountable since there would be no way to link the husband and the buddy. Interestingly, DeSantis also remembered saying to Michael that if someone dressed like a clown, it would be impossible to identify them and they would get away with it. Nevertheless, there is insufficient evidence for the authorities to charge Michael Warren with killing Marlene, his wife. When his mother passed away, Marlene's son, Joseph Aarons, then a teenager, recalled it as one of the darkest days of his life. In an interview, he stated that he wanted justice, but he would not say whether or not he believed Michael had any role in his mother's passing. Before Sheila's trial could start, she was imprisoned for 5 years. She was still in love with Michael at those times. They corresponded via multiple letters. Sheila Keene was sentenced to 12 years in jail after entering a guilty plea to second-degree murder following her trial.
Moving on to the next case.
Lillian D. Chloe. On Saturday, April 29, 1994, June Nicholas found her 89-year-old aunt, Lillian D. Chloe, dead on the bedroom floor of her yellow brick home at 1550 Northwest South Avenue in Pompano Beach, Florida. Nobody knew who had attacked, beaten, and strangled her during the day. Using forensic analysis and DNA evidence, this tragic story would lead investigators on an unexpected trip that would ultimately reveal a surprising fact that would be kept a secret for the next 28 years. June, along with the rest of Lillian's family, would be forever entangled in a web of grief and anguish due to the trivial question: who would want to cause harm to an innocent 89-year-old woman? Today's story takes us back 30 years to Lillian de Chloe's horrific 1994 assassination. The story of today takes place in the quaint Broward County, Florida city of Pompano Beach. The city's beaches, which have soft golden sand and turquoise blue waters, got their name from a species of fish that was formerly common off their shore. Despite the high crime rate in the region, Lillian D. Chloe, then 89 years old, was nevertheless able to enjoy Pompano Beach in 1994 after a youth well spent. Lillian de Chloe was born in 1905. Lillian dedicated her early years to helping people, especially via her employment as a nurse and teacher. Her neighbors, co-workers, patients, and pupils, among others, all loved her for her kindness, patience, and loving personality. Lillian's niece, June Nicholas, was one of the many people that loved her. When June, her siblings, and her cousins were younger, Lillian helped raise them. Lillian relocated to Pompano Beach, Florida, in order to have a peaceful final years. June took care of her as she grew older and started to suffer from ailments associated with aging-related cognitive loss. To everyone who knew her, 89-year-old Lillian de Chloe was a bright example of a life well lived. Lillian retired to 1515 Northwest 7th Avenue, Pompano Beach, her yellow brick house. Several years of working as a teacher and nurse in her community. There, by alone, she led a very regular existence until violence crashed through her bedroom window and destroyed her tranquility. Saturday, April 29, 1994, was just like any other Saturday for Lillian D. Chloe. Dressed in her pink and white checkered nightgown, she looked forward to spending the evening with her niece, June. June assumed the job of caregiver as Lillian became older, stopping over frequently to check on her and provide help with cleaning, medication reminders, or just to keep her company. June visited Lillian that fateful day at around 6 o'clock to check on her and to deliver some groceries that she had purchased for her. Upon entering the living area, she noticed that Lillian had disappeared. June then called out the aunt's name to see where she was, but she received no answer. June had checked the first bedroom, Lillian's normal sleeping quarters, but she was not there. June looked inside the bedroom on the right after following the corridor. She looked a little surprised. There on the floor, seemingly dead, lay her Aunt Lillian. June sobbed and ran back up the corridor to call the police. 2 Pompano Beach Police Department officers responded to June's 911 call, their heads aflutter with inquiries. It was not common to hear of an 89-year-old woman being murdered in her own house, so it seemed like a strange call. The officers were able to verify Lillian's death when they arrived at 1550 Northwest 7th Avenue. Lillian was discovered unconscious on the ground, adjacent to a toppled floor lamp and a phone with its cord severed. She appeared to have been battered because of the cuts and bruises all over her body. The room was littered with blood-stained towels and various articles of apparel. The officers also noticed a shattered window in the room where Lillian's body was found, which is most likely where Lillian's attackers had entered. The house had been looted. The numerous broken pieces of furniture strewn all over the room indicated that Lillian had engaged in a bloody struggle for her life. At first, it seemed like a crime of passion because of the horrific state of Lillian's body. Lillian's body was bruised all over. Her nose, ribs, and wrist were all fractured. Moreover, there were injuries around her genitalia, suggesting that she had been beaten before she passed away. The injuries on her neck indicated that she had also been strangled. The Broward Medical Examiner's Office concluded that Lillian died from asphyxiation and a strike to the head following her autopsy. Lillian's attackers used the phone, whose cable had been taken out, to strangle her. It was found near to her body. However, there was no indication that Lillian was the specific target of her attacker. Thus, it's likely that passion had nothing to do with the crime. Since Lillian was generally well-liked in her neighborhood, she had no adversaries. The general state of the residence and the crime scene, according to Pompano Beach Police Department Lieutenant Earl Llewellyn, suggested that the case was likely one of a burglary gone wrong. But Lillian's family didn't understand it. They knew she'd lived alone and didn't have any fortune to justify losing her life. June recalled that Lillian had no more than $50 at the residence at the time of the occurrence. After the residence was searched, the only item that appeared missing was a gold wedding band. Around 6:50 a.m. that morning, Lillian went to buy a newspaper, which was the last time the neighbors saw her. However, following the collection of evidence from the crime scene, authorities interviewed them to find out if they had heard anything regarding Lillian's murder. She looked healthy that morning, even though the murder took place during the day, and no one could recall seeing anything strange. In a few days, detectives had gathered enough information on potential suspects in Lillian's murder to warrant an arrest, but not enough to make an arrest. With a $1,000 prize for information leading to Lillian's killer's identity, the police hoped to entice witnesses to try to remember anything they might have heard or seen that could help with the investigation. Pompano Beach Authorities spokeswoman Sandra King also told the reporters that the authorities were looking for anyone who had information about the crime or the man who perpetrated it. In an interview with The Sun, Sandra King said, "At this point, we're encouraging anyone who saw anything to call us, holding the blood of an 89-year-old helpless woman in their hands. There's a human creature running loose." But after the first several weeks of inquiry and optimistic developments, all leads quickly drained out, and the case went cold. June Nicholas, on the other hand, was grieving the loss of her beloved Aunt Lillian. Without her aunt, and without understanding what had transpired or who had injured her so badly, she found it extremely difficult to move on. June had to take a full year out of work due to the loss of her aunt. For several months, she was in too much pain to look after her kids, so she had to ask someone else to look after them while she grieved. She could not get rid of the image of Lillian laying on her living room floor, no matter how hard she tried. worse, the lawsuit was dropped, eliminating any chance of discovering the real outcome of Lillian's whereabouts. For the ensuing 10 years, no fresh information on the Lillian DeCloe case was released from the case file, and it was forgotten. But by 1999, Pompano Beach was using the Broward Sheriff's Office for police enforcement. Part of this involved taking charge of each and every cold case in Pompano Beach. One of the cold cases that the Broward Sheriff's Office detectives reopened by 2004 was the 1994 murder of Lillian DeCloe. David Towsley, a detective with the Broward Sheriff's Office, oversaw the investigation. With the help of other detectives in the unit, they re-examined evidence recovered from the crime site almost 30 years earlier and combed through old case files and DNA databases. One piece of evidence that stood out particularly was the pink and white checkered nightgown that Lillian was wearing the day she was killed. When they sent the nightgown to the lab for more testing, they discovered that it contained the male attacker's bodily fluids. Perhaps the most crucial piece of evidence in solving the case was this knowledge. The authorities created a genetic profile using the fluid sample from the nightgown and placed it into the FBI's CODIS, or Combined DNA Database System, but they were unable to locate a match. Again, a promising lead had disappeared, and the case was dropped. Detective Towsley was determined to close the investigation in order to give Lillian DeCloe's family closure and the opportunity to go on. Despite the extra 15 years, Detective Towsley's persistence allowed him to re-examine the case in 2019 under the Broward Sheriff's Office's newly formed cold case team. Reopening the DeCloe case didn't seem to have any positive outcomes, according to Jennifer Parker, the criminalist from the Broward Sheriff's Office who oversaw the DNA examination of the case's evidence. But because to developments in DNA testing technology, Towsley believed he could identify the individual who had put their bodily material on Lillian's nightgown. The Broward County Crime Lab obtained a more complete DNA profile in 2021. Because of this fresh analysis of technology, Detective Towsley and his crew asked the Florida Department of Law Enforcement to use the DNA profile for a family search of its offender database. Stated differently, they cross-referenced the DNA profile with the database of people who had been taken into custody and recorded as criminals. This method compares the DNA profile to possible first-order relatives in the database, such as a father, sister, or kid. A match was discovered by the search. The DNA from the crime scene was strikingly identical to that of a known offender in the system. The man whose DNA was found on Lillian DeCloe's clothes the day she was slain was identified as the offender. This man's name was Johnny Matt Brown. The murder of Lillian DeCloe occurred while Johnny Matt Brown was 40 years old. He was a 1954-born Vietnam War veteran who also suffered from PTSD. Life after the service was not enjoyable for Johnny. He started using drugs as a PTSD coping method, which eventually resulted in drug addiction. He battled for a while to obtain steady work because of his addiction and mental health issues. Johnny found himself homeless as well. Upon originally investigating Lillian's death, Johnny was not considered a suspect in this case or any other crime. He went entirely overlooked. However, it became increasingly obvious that Johnny was most likely the one who had attacked Lillian on that fatal day when the authorities were able to match Johnny's DNA profile. Police also found some important information. Even though Johnny and Lillian lived a short distance apart in the early 1990s and early 1994, Johnny had passed away by the time investigators were able to find him to question. In 2010, he died of natural causes at the age of 56. In Lake Worth, Florida, at the South Florida National Cemetery, Johnny was buried. A judge approved the Broward Sheriff's Office detective's request in August 2022 to exhume Johnny's remains for examination. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, the Palm Beach Medical Examiner's Office, and her forensic anthropologist, who excavated the bones and tested their DNA, all worked together with the investigators. The experts evaluated samples collected from Johnny's body in the Broward Sheriff's Office Crime Lab to get the most precise result possible. The office's criminal list supervisor, Jennifer Parker, compared the findings to the pre-existing DNA profile. Parker took a sample of Johnny's bone marrow from his ribs so that it could be examined. The sample found at the crime site and the known DNA profile matched, according to the test results. The DNA results showed that there was 66.8 trillion times greater likelihood that Johnny's DNA was from the crime scene than that of anyone else, according to the Broward Sheriff's Office. With this conclusive evidence, Johnny Mac Brown's guilt as Lillian DeClose's murderer was without dispute. That did not, however, fully explain Johnny's motivation. The prior conclusion that the whole episode was just a case of burglary gone wrong seemed to be the most likely explanation for what happened. In a press conference, Broward County Sheriff Gregory Toney said that it was most likely an opportunistic crime. The sheriff indicated that he only lived a few houses down from there. When he hit hard times, he became homeless and acquired a drug habit, which led him to break into the house. Maybe he didn't realize she was alone in there. But she was 89. Because everything seemed to have been removed from the house and all of the drawers were open, it looked as though she was living alone. All of the evidence that the police had obtained up to this point was shown to the Broward State Attorney's Office. The prosecution there concluded that Johnny Mac Brown was involved in Lillian DeClose's killing after reviewing the evidence. The issue was settled. Justice May